well, it's 7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I know there's still people coming in here, but I'm Allison Lockridge. I'm the College and Career Counselor at Greenwich High School. And just wanted to take a minute to say good evening and welcome to all of the students and parents that have signed on with us tonight. So this is our annual pre-college night. We used to call it pre-college night, and now we've been calling it the college panel. And I was looking back at my notes this afternoon and realized the first panel that I attended was back in 2003, which is crazy. But it's definitely an evening that I look forward to every year in the fall. Each year as a department, we bring all of our panelists out to dinner before the presentation. We usually go to the Ginger Man on the Avenue, which I know Nathan has joined us a few times. So for Hope and Stephanie, we'll owe you a Ginger Man night out. But it's usually just a fun evening. We discuss admission trends, we share some laughs before the presentation, and then we go back to the high school and the pack is filled with families and everybody's just kind of eager to hear what all the panelists have to share about their insights into the admissions process. So things look a little differently this year. And while I wish we could all be in person, I'm just very thankful that we have all three of you who are extremely experienced and will hopefully really share some some tips to mostly our sophomores and juniors, and and really just have an overall discussion tonight on college admissions. So since this evening is primarily dedicated to juniors and sophomores, our topics will be centered around factors considered in the admissions process and how to begin to shape your college list. However, we will also discuss the impact of COVID also on admissions, because I know that's on everybody's minds. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, I'd like to thank Greenwich Public Schools for the use of their Zoom account tonight, and also Michael Antonucci, who is here with us this evening in the event we might need any technology support through the night. So each panelist will take about 10 minutes to speak on a topic, and then we'll really spend the last 20 to 30 minutes answering questions. So you can go ahead and use the Q&A chat function to ask your questions. And I might just recommend holding off on posting your questions until after we hear from each panelist, just because you may get your questions answered in advance. So I'd like to go ahead and now ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and maybe we can start with Stephanie.
Absolutely. Hi guys, I'm Stephanie Depaul at the University of Richmond. I'm the Vice President for Enrollment Management here, so I work with undergraduate admission, financial aid, and scholars and fellowships programs. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the University of Richmond when I get started in a few minutes talking about building your college list.
Excellent. And Hope?
Hi everyone, my name is Hope Alchin. I'm an Assistant Director of Admissions at Washington University in St. Louis. I work in a little bit of everything, but I'm lucky enough to be the one who recruits students in Connecticut, so pleased to meet you all tonight.
Thank you. And Nathan?
Hope has the good pleasure working with my good friend Renee. Please tell her hello for me. I'm Nathan First. I'm the Vice President for Enrollment at the University of Connecticut, or UConn, as you all know it, the home of the Huskies here in your home state of Connecticut. My portfolio is much the same as Stephanie's at the University of Richmond: admissions, financial aid, registration, orientation, and a couple other odds and ends. Glad to be here.
Great. Well, thank you all again. And Stephanie will kick off our presentation on really talking about shaping your college list, how to visit colleges virtually in the age we're in today, and also touching on the topic of demonstrated interest. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Stephanie.
Thanks so much, Allison. And thank you again all for coming tonight. I know that you may be as zoomed out as the rest of us are, so we do appreciate you taking some time, and hopefully we'll be entertaining enough to keep you engaged for a little bit at least tonight. So this is set up at the University of Richmond, and in building your college list, obviously the first thing you should write down is the University of Richmond, perhaps followed by WashU and UConn. But University of Richmond, for those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a smaller private university located in Richmond, Virginia. We've got about 3,200 undergraduate students. We're highly residential. Almost everyone lives on campus all 4 years by choice. We are Division I for athletics, with probably the most unusual mascot in the NCAA. If you don't know, we're the Spiders, home of the mighty Spiders. We are need-blinded admission. We do meet full administrative financial need, very high study abroad rates, and of course, we're all very concerned these days with what happens after. 95% of our students are off the job market within 3 months of graduation. About a quarter of our students go directly to grad school, med school admission rate over 75%, all those good things. It's a wonderful small community in a great location, and probably pretty familiar to a lot of you guys because our #1 state for students is every year either Virginia or Connecticut. So neck and neck with those two great states with students at the University of Richmond. So as sophomores and juniors, hopefully you're starting to think about college. You should not be all the way down the path at this point. This is really an exploration time for you. And so I did want to talk a little bit about building your list, about college visits in the age of COVID, and about that mysterious thing everyone calls demonstrating interest. And I'm hoping that I can demystify some of this for you. I'm also hoping that tonight you'll realize that we are all human beings too. We are not mean, elusive, and cruel people who try and make this thing difficult for you. We really do want to be resources to you and be helpful to you as you go through this process. So in starting out and thinking about how to build your list, what schools to start with, I will say it can be really overwhelming. I mean, there are 4,000 schools out there, and guess what? Almost all of them have study abroad and 200 clubs and organizations and 100 different majors. And if there's not one that you like, you can make your own. There's a lot of similarities sometimes, so it can be really hard to differentiate and can feel overwhelming. There's been a lot of research done, in fact, that shows that if you have a lot of choices, you can actually be less satisfied with what you pick than if you have fewer choices. So the very diversity of this amazing higher education system we have can kind of make this process more stressful instead of less stressful. So take a big breath, just in and out, repeat the mantra, it's gonna be okay. You're gonna end up in a great college, it's a wonderful fit for you. And how stressful your journey is how stressful you wanna make it. So as you're starting to think about, oh my gosh, how do I narrow this down? Start with things that really are just simple. Think about how close to home you want to be, or how far away from home you want to be. Knowing that that might change over the next few years, just start with that filter, because that can impact where you end up living after graduation. Think about weather. I know it's silly, but if you can't stand the cold, please don't go farther north. If you can't stand the heat, please remember to check and make sure everything's air conditioned in the South. It is. We don't like the heat either, frankly. Think about big cities and small towns. Think about size. You know, how big do you want your classes to be? How small do you want them to be? You know, how important is sports to you in that sort of Division I atmosphere? Think about residential environment. Do you want to be somewhere where people live on campus? Does that matter to you? These are all sort of basic level things that you can start checking off a list and help you narrow down from a gazillion schools to a smaller handful of schools. There are things you should think about that you might not be on your radar yet, and you'll start to learn this lingo, but you need to be thinking about how successful students are. We call that retention rate and graduation rate. If students stay from the first year to the second year, it says really good things about a school. Always check that. And if they graduate in 4 years, it sort of matters, right? Because really the most expensive education is an incomplete education, or an education that takes 5 or 6 years. That can have a big impact on your success long term. So think about those as important factors. Cost matters too, and at some point you're going to have to sit down and have the money conversation. But in thinking about cost, you need to dig a little more deeply. And so when you get into your junior and senior year, you'll need to be thinking about what it really costs versus what the sticker price says, because there's often a huge difference. And for parents who have their pens out and are taking big notes, let me give you access to a wonderful tool that I think we all use, called My Intuition. myintuition.org, spelled just like that, M-Y-I-N, tuition.org. It's a place you can go and answer 6 or 7 questions and get a really accurate estimate of how much a school really costs. There's also things called net price calculators, but they take like 30 minutes, all of your tax records, and 1 bottle of very good wine to get through. So myintuition.com is definitely a place to start when thinking about cost. The other thing I really encourage you to do is think beyond everybody else's list. If everybody else has the same schools on their list, break out of that mold. Be a trailblazer. Be a leader at your school and help your classmates learn about other schools they may not have heard about. So use programs like Naviance and bigcollege.com and use those to filter down and look at schools that might be a good fit for you. And be that person in your college, on your high school campus who says, hey, have you heard about XYZ University? It's really cool and this is why. Or ask trusted advisors like your counselors a simple question like, what's the best school for me that I've never heard about? It's a great way to start a unique list, and that's what you're trying to build. You're trying to build a college list that's about you. It's not about where your friends are going. It's not about necessarily where your parents went. Sorry, mom and dad. It's about you and what the right fit for you is going to be. So make it a goal to have a really mixed list, and make it your goal this year, particularly for sophomores, to try and be growing the list instead of shrinking the list, right? Because in the end, that diverse list is going to give you the most options available. Now, I will say that one thing we're going to care about a lot is that you have taken the time to learn about us. So we have added a gazillion different ways to get to know our universities in a virtual environment. And frankly, we sort of expect that you will have done some of that you will have done some of your research and some of your homework. So go on the web pages as you explore schools. And thank goodness now it's easier than ever to explore them virtually. Most of us have VR tours. You can slap on the headset and look around the room and go into the lab and all that. We all have information sessions that are recorded online. We've all blown up our YouTube content and our Instagram channels, and we've really gone crazy finally trying to catch up with you guys on social media. Make sure that you take a look at those things. If you have the chance to do an information session, all schools are doing them differently. But if you can find one that's live with a student presenter, that's so the way to go, because you want to hear from current students as much as you can. Some schools are doing limited in-person visits, and every school that isn't wishes that they were. So do keep checking back to see when we're starting our visit programs again, because we do want to have you on our campus, because we do believe that walking on campus is a really good way to see what's going on and to get a feel for the campus. But if you can't do that, take advantage of every opportunity to hear student voices, either through live narrated student sessions or student Q&As or student, we call them spider chats with current students. Make sure you take advantage of all of those. And one really good question to ask or thing to look for when you're doing all these information sessions is try and figure out, what is the school invested in? What are they building right now? We're building a well-being center. We're super excited about it. It tells you something about us that we're going to have an entire building dedicated to well-being, right? Including having a facility dog. His name's Emmett. He's precious. He's a cockadoodle. No, he's a golden doodle. We're very excited about Emmett. He's our newest staff member at Richmond, and we're thrilled. Anyway, find out what people are investing in. Find out, how much undergraduate research is being done. Where are they putting their money? Are they keeping the facilities up to date? What are they doing to support students? Where are they investing? Tells you what they're valuing. So as you're doing that research, the other thing you want to do is you want to make sure that we know that you're doing that research to some level, right? And this is where this mythical thing called demonstrated interest comes in. You'll hear this over the next couple of years as you go through the college process. People will say, oh, do they calculate demonstrated interest? What they're talking about is this. Let me tell you how we do it at Richmond. At the University of Richmond, if you do an information session, if you sign up for a campus tour and come, or if you come to our high school visit, even virtually, which by the way is October 15th, 7 p.m. Marilyn Hester will be virtually meeting with you guys. We will record on our system that you were there, right? We'll know that you came. If we send you an email and you open it, we'll know that you opened it, right? We watch these things, we monitor these things. At Richmond, we do not use those in making an admissions decision. It's simply data that we gather because it helps us later to try and figure out how many students are going to come. Because that's what we have to do as enrollment managers. We have to say, okay, if we've met this many people, this many bodies are going to show up, or else we have a horrible residence hall problem with far too many people, more people than beds. So we look at that information in our enrollment modeling. We don't use it in making admissions decisions. Some schools do. And you can ask schools, and they'll be honest with you about it. So some schools do say, yeah, we're going to look at your demonstrated interest, and that's going to be part of our decision about whether you're admitted or not. Ask schools if they use demonstrated interest, and then make sure that you're showing us what you're doing. It's really easy now to look for a college without us knowing you're looking. You may have spent 19 hours on a web page devoted to the residential life experience at WashU, because they have these great residential colleges, right? But WashU may not know that. So it's important that you go ahead and tell them. So there are a couple of different ways you can do it. As I said, go to the information sessions we do at high schools. It's a great way to do this. Sign up for online information sessions and tours. That's great. If you come to a campus that's closed, our campus is currently closed for visitors, which means I see visitors every single day outside of my window. If you come to my campus right now, we do have places where you can scan a QR code and say I was here, or you can email us at the admissions office and say, hey, I did a self-guided tour, or I did the driving tour, and let us know that you were here. So make sure you sort of register your visit if you come, even if we're closed. And also, please know it's totally okay to follow up directly with school reps. So I don't read applications from Connecticut. I'm on the admissions committee, but Connecticut's not my territory. It's Maryland Hester's territory. If you have a question about the admissions process or University of Richmond, you can email Maryland Hester and just ask her that question. Say, hey, I was reading about this, and can you tell me more about it? That's a way to show that you're learning about our school and that you're serious about your application here. I would say in those emails to admissions offices, try not to ask a question that's Googleable. It's one thing to send an email that says, how many students do you have? Googleable. It's another thing to say, I see you have about 3,000 students. You're kind of a small school. How does that play out for students? What do they get from that? How do they benefit from that smaller environment? That's not a Googleable answer, right? So make sure you're asking questions that add a layer of information. The other thing you can do, of course, is apply. It's a great way to show interest. And think about when you apply. If a school has an earlier round, early decision, of course, is the ultimate expression of interest because it means you're coming if you're admitted. But even early action can indicate that you're a little bit farther down the path. And in that application, pay extra attention to how you answer any supplemental questions. The supplemental questions in an application that are specific to a school are a great place to demonstrate that you have paid attention to the school, that you've had a serious search, that you're not just, asking us out for coffee. You really do want to have dinner. You're serious about it. And finally, I would just say, take your time. You don't have to have an answer right now. You don't have to know what your dream school is today. You've got time to explore, to fall in love with one place and then fall out of love a little bit and maybe fall back in love. You've got time. And this is supposed to be a journey that is matching you and your strengths and your interests with what schools have to offer. And your interests might change over the next 18 months or 2 years. So give yourself the flexibility to look at things that are a little out of the norm, to put yourself first in every single search that you do, and to recognize that at the end of the day, it is going to be okay. You're going to end up the right school for you if you put in the legwork. And oh, and P.S., listen to your counselors because they're really smart and they know more about colleges and universities than all of us put together. So that is my advice on the college search process: building your list, virtual visits, do them, they're kind of fun, and demonstrating interest. And I will be happy to answer questions when we get to that point. Allison, back to you.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. And also, just before we move on to Hope, just to let juniors know, the next evening will be in December, January. We have 2 college kickoffs and counselors will be presenting. And then after that meeting, you have an individual conference with your counselor. Parents are invited. It's an hour-long meeting. And that's where we really start to generate a complete list of schools. So we're here to really guide you through that whole process. So what's nice about tonight is kind of just, getting a preview of what's to come. Okay, great. Can you, do you want to take over there, Hope?
Absolutely. And I hope you're all taking some notes because Stephanie gave you some really wonderful advice that you're going to wish you had in a few months too. So thank you so much, Allison, for giving the floor. I will also start with just the quick 1-minute overview of WashU. For those of you who aren't familiar, WashU is a mid-sized liberal arts institution, so we're a little bit bigger than Richmond, where we have about 7,000 undergraduate students. We're also a Tier 1 research institution. We're lucky, as you may guess from our name, to be located in the wonderful city of St. Louis. So we do have that really wonderful urban atmosphere, as well as being a residential campus. More than 80% of our students will also stay on campus at all four years at WashU. And they'll be involved not only in a really wide range of extracurriculars on campus, but also, perhaps double majoring in our community. We're quite known for having academic flexibility and being able to pick up a couple different programs while you're on campus. We do have a liberal arts college at our core, but we also have opportunities for engineering, business, art, architecture, and the like. In terms of our admissions policies, pretty standard to what Stephanie mentioned. WashU is uses a holistic review process. We encourage all students who are interested to explore more, and we do meet 100% of demonstrated financial need in our financial aid process as well. For more questions about WashU, you know exactly how to reach me. Stephanie, you just told you all of the ways. But from now on, I'm going to speak a little bit more on what you can control in the college process, starting right now. I think just thinking about the time that we're in, it feels like a lot is out of our hands. Perhaps you're having a school year that is not at all what you intended. Perhaps you're not going to get to do the really wonderful things that you had planned out for this fall or even this spring. And we recognize that, but we also want to empower you to think of this time as your own time to get ahead, or to really think about the college process, even though you may not have started until a little bit later down the line in a typical year. So with that in mind, I'm going to break things up into the different pieces that you're going to be looking at the application process, starting with academics. So we all know academics are super important when you are applying to college, and that is going to be a primary part of many of our review processes. And with that in mind, I think I'll start with the transcript. I can only speak for WashU on this, but I will say that at WashU, the transcript is the most important piece of paper or virtual piece of paper that we will receive for your application. It is simply the thing that we're going to spend the most time on when we are reviewing your application. It speaks a lot about how ready are you for any academic institution that you are going on to next. And it is the most comprehensive tool we have to look at that, right? It's 3.5, maybe up to 4 years of data based on your own grades. And so those of you who are sophomores especially, but also juniors, have the power to still shape what your transcript looks like. And that is so important because when you're actually applying for college, that's just not possible for many students in their senior year. So I think the two important aspects of your transcript that we look at are your rigor and your grades. Grades are pretty self-explanatory. We're hoping to see the best that you can achieve on your transcript. And so I think we can all say that the more A's, the better, but to also contextualize your grades, right? So knowing that, obviously an A+ is an A+, there's, nothing wrong with that. But also knowing that, if there's challenging parts of your transcript, it doesn't mean that you're not ready for a certain institution, right? Being able to show that you strived and you overcome and you brought up your grades over the course of 4 years or even just one class is also a really important piece that we look at. And so even if you do get, a C or whatever grade it is in your mind that you're thinking of when I'm having this conversation right now, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world, right? It's a chance for you to show us that you are able to be a resilient student and that you are going to learn going forward. But I also think that we can talk about rigor in this conversation as well. I know you all are lucky enough to have a lot of choice in your classes, and that is fantastic. But with that in mind, a lot of schools are going to be looking at what did you do with those choices? What choices did you ultimately make when we are looking at your transcript? And I think we're looking for a balance. We want you to explore what is truly interesting to you. There's not necessarily going to be a right answer, but different schools are looking for different things. Many websites will give some recommendations. So for instance, if you log on to WashU's website, you're going to see a recommendation that we want students to take 2 years of a foreign language, hopefully 4 years of English, and a few other things on that, just to make sure you're academically prepared for our institution. That varies. So this is a good time to continue doing that research and think beforehand, what may a school be looking for? What would make me more competitive in the application process? At WashU and many other institutions, rigor is of course going to be seen as a good thing. We want to see those AP classes that if you're able to take them, and we want to see those instances where you pushed yourself a little bit harder. You took a class that is more like a college class than anything else you've been able to offer. But I also think we want to see that in context. We want to see a challenging yet healthy curriculum. I think that's really important to be pairing those together. You should be able to have a conversation with Allison or your counselor to make sure that you are on track to have a healthy and challenging semester. We would rather see, maybe one less AP class, but some really strong grades and involvement outside of the classroom than a student who took all AP classes and really struggled through that semester. Remember, you're making choices that are going to reflect what your choices look like in college. And we don't want to have a student come to school and take a ton of hard classes and really struggle either. And so making sure you're thinking about that balance throughout the semesters that you have left. So if you need any help with that, your school counselors are the right people to go to. Again, they are experts. They're much more knowledgeable than any of us and can really talk you through what those class choices may be. With this in mind, I do want to bring in the other piece of academics, which is perhaps the thing that's living in many of your minds of standardized testing. And while it may seem impossible to think about standardized testing, and I know seniors are definitely thinking about that perhaps more than anyone else right now, but I do want to think about the idea of a testing plan. And I think this plan may change. We can all recognize that your plan may change, but it is important to think about, are you planning on taking standardized testing? And I think for many of you, the answer should be right now, probably yes, if it's going to be part of your process. But if so, ACT, SAT, and do you want to start studying now? I think there's no time that's too early to start studying, especially if you're a junior and you think this may be coming up in the spring. Thinking about a study plan is important. And, you know, given the nature of testing, it is more realistic than ever that students will only take one test. And so that one test may be more important than it has been in the past. That first test you take maybe end up being your only test score. And so this idea of super scoring, you know, is really nice, but maybe less practical. So thinking about how important that first test is going to be is really great in your process to begin that studying a little bit early. Right now, of course, we encourage that seniors are the ones who are taking those test spots. They need it more than our juniors right now. They need it right now in order to apply for schools. But thinking about spring is a good time to, you know, start having those conversations. Will test spots be available? We don't know. But if, you know, getting that ACT study book probably wouldn't hurt in your process either. I would definitely focus on those ACT or SAT. If you have the chance to take a subject test, that's great. Although I think right now we're all prioritizing our main test more than ever. That being said, there are so many institutions who are opting to go test optional. And so part of your testing plan can also be deciding that you do not want to take a standardized test, and that is absolutely okay. You should make that decision though in conjunction with your counselor. Just make sure that the schools that you are looking at and hoping to attend are also the ones who are on that test optional plan. Because you don't want to get in a situation where you actually didn't have a test and you needed one. So make sure that you double check those policies. They're a little confusing right now. Who is test optional, test flexible, you know, on a 1-year policy or a 3-year policy. So just make sure that you are being thoughtful in how you make that testing plan to make sure you don't get in a bit of a bind as you head into your senior year. Testing is certainly not everything, but I think it's important to make sure we don't forget about it, since for many of our institutions, you will be required to submit that testing if you were a junior or a sophomore right now. That was a little bit on academics. We're going to move now into thinking about those other pieces of your application, which are certainly my favorite part to read as an admissions officer, as fun as it is to try to get through your transcripts. And I think I'll start here with, you know, I think letters of recommendation is a often overlooked piece of the process. So right now you have a really wonderful time to start thinking about who you would like to develop a relationship, right? You don't get to decide right now who you want to write that letter, but thinking about, wow, when you enter a classroom and you see a teacher who is just, you know, you're like, wow, I love their subject, or I love their teaching style, and I love this class. How can you get to know them? How can you show them who you are so they can write a really well-informed letter of recommendation? On the college side, we're hoping that your letters of recommendation don't just say they showed up, they turned in their homework, and they got an A. That is not a good letter of recommendation. It's a fine letter, but it didn't tell us anything about you. We're hoping that able to share a little bit about their learning style, who you are in the classroom. Are you always the first to participate? Are you always someone who's leading the groups when you break up into different project areas? And so if you can develop those relationships with your professors, or your teachers, I should say, you are going to be in a much better position than a student who, you know, hasn't been able to talk to their teacher throughout the entirety of the semester. So I think it's great to go into the semester knowing that you may end up asking this person to write a letter and hoping that they can take away some really great information about you throughout the semester. Besides letters of recommendation though, we do look at other pieces, including your extracurricular list. So regardless of which application platform you use, whether it's the Common Application, the Coalition Application, QuestBridge, anything like that, there'll be a space for you to list out your extracurricular involvement. This includes anything you were doing when you were not eating, sleeping, and doing your homework. So it's going to be, you know, those organized clubs that you can do at school, but also your religious involvement. If you have a part-time job and take care of your family members, hobbies, all of those things are extracurricular involvement. And now is certainly the time to start getting involved. You know, you don't want to start joining clubs your senior year. You want to start joining clubs earlier than that. It gives you time to have sustained, really organic, wonderful involvement. And that is what we're all looking for. We're looking for future community members who are excited to make an impact in a certain area. And we often see those leadership skills, those collaboration skills coming out most strongly outside of the classroom. So please make sure you're demonstrating that to us. We have no specific clubs that we're looking for. I want to make that clear. You know, no one is looking for, you know, only people who were on the newspaper or only people who played, you know, basketball when they were in school. That's certainly not how we're going through this process. But we're looking for involvement in anything, and hopefully really authentic involvement. You know, we're not looking for people who decided to join 100 clubs because they wanted to list out 100 clubs, but rather people who, when they graduate, we're going to look back and say, oh, wow, we miss you in this club because you were such a huge part of this organization. How are we ever going to do this without you? And so your job is to think about how you can be that in whatever space you've started to get involved in. If you're already involved in a lot of things, that's great. Maybe thinking about those leadership roles and how that is really giving you a new perspective as a student group member. Perhaps if you're not involved, this is the time to start. I think of maybe different in a virtual landscape, but there's no reason that you can't start, joining clubs, going to those Zoom meetings that I'm sure are happening at all of your organizations, because we'll want to see what you are like outside of the classroom as well. The last piece I'll leave you on here for this extra piece is thinking about essays. And it is certainly too early for any of you to be writing a college essay right now. So take a deep breath. I'm not recommending that. I am recommending that you start thinking about what your topic may be, because this is often the hardest part about writing a college essay, is deciding what is your Common or Coalition app main essay going to be about. And there are many, many options, because one of the prompts is pick your own prompt, which is a dreaded perhaps, but really important way for you to share information with us. So there's no reason you need to pick anything now. You have, especially for my sophomores, many years to go. But I always encourage students to be keeping that in the back of their mind, right? So when you have that moment that's really important to you, you're like, I want to remember this moment so that I can go back and write about it. And then I could share what I was feeling in this moment, because we're really looking for moments. And I think that's something that's often understated in the college essay, is that we don't expect a list of your accomplishments. We're not looking for anything like that. We are looking for your voice, and your voice is really clear when you're describing a moment. And so if you can capture those moments, think about them throughout your time in high school, you're more likely to write a really informative and compelling essay that your admissions officer is going to just love to read and want to share. I would also recommend thinking about those extracurriculars, that you're also writing those down too. Sometimes you forget how accomplished you are. I know, surprising, but it happens all the time. You forget you were, treasurer of a certain club. You forget that you actually had this really great initiative that you started when you were on student council. You want to make sure you write those things down so that when you were filling out those lists, you don't have to remember everything, but it's all right there. Just open a note up on your phone, just list a few things as they happen, write them down, and then it will basically be made for you. So when you do that application, it's just a little bit less stressful. The last thing I'll do before I turn things over to Nathan here is thinking about those pieces kind of outside of the application itself. Stephanie mentioned a few of these already, and I cannot, emphasize enough how important it is to eventually think about financial aid. This is a great time to have a conversation with your family about what those circumstances may look like for you. If you know that a merit scholarship is going to be a huge part of your financial aid process, great. This is a good time to think about that, because you can do your research as what schools offer these kinds of scholarships. How do you get them? What qualities are you going to need to show in your application in order to receive one? And to think about that on the front end instead of trying to find a bunch of scholarships on the back end, because sometimes it's hard to find ones that exactly fit your interests and what you were looking for in a university. With that in mind, this is also a great time to start looking for scholarships in your community. I sometimes am so surprised how many communities offer scholarships for students who are involved in specific areas. And there's no reason you can't look for them even as a sophomore or a junior. You certainly, again, you're not applying for them. You're just keeping them on your radar. So when it is time to apply, you don't have to do double the work. You've already found a list of them, and you can simply fill out the applications rather than having to search them out. I would say the last thing that I will mention is that while there's certainly a lot you can do right now about your college application process, there's also a lot right now you can do to just be a student in high school. And ultimately, the things that you accomplish in high school outside of the college application process are the things that make you a really compelling applicant, right? Regardless of how your college essay looks like or what you've done, and how you structured your activities list. If you've done something really amazing, your community members are going to tell us about it in your letters of recommendation. And, Allison calling me and saying, guess what? So-and-so is amazing. If you don't take them, this is going to be awful. So I think that those kinds of conversations are really compelling for us and important. And if you're that kind of person in your community, we're going to know it, even if it's not in your essay. So think about this as a time where you can, despite all the heaviness that is happening and all the hardship that we are going through, it's a time to think about what your interests are, how you can make a difference, and how you can show us that you made that difference too. So with that in mind, I will turn things back over to Allison to see if she has anything she wants to add.
Thank you. That was excellent advice. I just wrote down my own notes about a lot of things you've said. So I appreciate that, Hope. And we'll go ahead and turn it over to Nathan, and then we'll open it up for some questions.
Hey again, everybody. As I mentioned before, I'm from the University of Connecticut, your state's flagship university. So a place that has its flagship campus in Storrs, Connecticut, where originally we started an agriculture school. And it's now known for education, engineering, business, psychology, and a number of other programs, including marine sciences. So we have campuses nearby you in Stamford, but also in Waterbury, Hartford, in our marine sciences campus at Avery Point near New London. Connecticut. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID on all this process and the things that we're managing, and perhaps what you're managing and navigating as well. So, this is a familiar process normally. I mean, many of you may have siblings that are older, or obviously some of you have parents that have gone through the process in the past, others not. And we all have come to know what that process looks like. And under these circumstances, an obvious question is, well, what's changed? What's different? What should I think differently about under the circumstances that have me studying remotely or under a hybrid schedule? Allison, I can't remember the latest in terms of what the class schedule looks like. At Greenwich, I have an eighth grader and I have a fifth grader at home. We're still in hybrid for our kids, and so they go to class. They go to school on Monday and Tuesday and are remote the rest of the week. Obviously, very, very different. And my daughter this morning was suggesting to me, "Dad, I just want to be in school all the time. It's what I want." So obviously a very, very different environment for all of us. And some of the things that were mentioned before are absolutely relevant. So the SAT exam obviously is not as easily accessible. We're under pass-fail grades. Some of you might have heard me talking about that for our university students, that might change the way that you look at your record. As Stephanie mentioned, talked a little bit about visiting campuses. A lot of that has been pushed online. It's not so easy just to kind of go and register for a tour and show up in our visitor centers, even though you can come and take a look at some things. The FAFSA's been mentioned, the financial aid process. But at the end of the day, what I want you to remember is that, first of all, you're all navigating this together, and actually you're navigating it with us. We're navigating a lot of the same challenges. And so you will get through this, and you will present credentials, and you will apply to college, and you will visit campuses. And hopefully sooner than later, that'll be done in person, right? That's what our hope is. I think all of us agree that that's what we hope occurs. But it's all going to be okay. That's the thing that I want you to know and hear the most. In a sense, you have to trust that the process will lend itself to giving you opportunities to shine, just as what it would if coronavirus or a pandemic really never happened. So the opportunities that you may have for involvement that Hope talked a lot about, they might be slightly different. And the way I've tried to chat with my kids about this is that, there's adversity that we're facing, there's challenges that we're facing, but in those challenges, and in that adversity lies opportunity. It's not going to be the same opportunity presented in the same way, but it's going to push you to grow as an individual, and you'll have opportunities to find your passion in a way that may not have been there before. And I really believe that you're going to find the opportunity to do that through this process. One obvious question that we get quite a lot right now is, how is coronavirus impacting the ability to do our work on the review side or on the visit side or what have you? And it absolutely, we have to look at this not the same way necessarily, but we have to understand, most importantly, how we need to look at your application in maybe a slightly different way than what we may have done so in the past, in light of the pass-fail grades as an example, or in light of the fact that many of us are test optional or will be test optional either immediately or for a period of years. At UConn, we've announced that we're going to do that for the period of 3 years. So for you, when you're applying to UConn, you can opt to go test optional. It doesn't mean that you don't have to sit for the SAT, or you shouldn't consider doing that, but that's a choice that you'll be able to make as a part of the process. Then obviously it's going to be a question of, well, wait a minute, what does that really mean? What does that mean when, Hope spoke a lot about that holistic review, which is very familiar to all of us. So what's that mean for me when you look at my application for admission? And what it means really for us, we've already done the work of recalibrating our review processes, we're really going to place a lot of emphasis on those grades where they are available, of course, on your activities, on your essay, on your recommendation letters, in light of the fact that you may not have a test score that you're presenting. We're not going to penalize students that do not submit a test score, nor are we going to give extra credit to those students that do submit a test score. We've worked very, very hard in recalibrating our process such that we can ensure that that is the case, that whatever you present to us is going to allow you to shine through that process in much the same way that that's the way the process was set up to begin with. So, and really what we're all about is trying to identify ways for students to shine through the process. And for some students, that's going to be through your GPA. And for other students, that might be through a combination of activities and other things that you're doing in the community. And for some of you, you shut the lights out on the SAT and great work. That's really what you ought to place your emphasis on, is where do I shine and where can I grow and continue to strengthen my background and the things that I have going on for myself. So I wanted to say, not just to the students, but to Hope and to Steph, also Allison, it's going to be okay. We're all going to be okay. We're going to navigate this process together. And you would be surprised to hear how many of our faculty, they're calling me right now, wanting to know, what should I tell their kids about navigating the same process. This is really kind of amazing in a way that maybe normally would happen to a degree, but it's happening far more. This is the same type of advice that I'm giving them as they have, their kids going through the process now as they're high school juniors or high school seniors. The one thing that I would just say, don't just cruise during this time. It could be easy perhaps to do so. You attend your classes, and as I was listening to Hope talk in particular and about your engagement and involvement, like we've said before, those opportunities may be slightly adjusted or adapted to the current environment or setting. Don't just cruise. Try and find opportunity to do something new or different that's exciting to you. Make sure that that's authentic and it feels like it's energizing to you. But take advantage of those opportunities that are here today, and they wouldn't have been there if not for the pandemic. And I really believe that those opportunities are out there for you to do those things. So absolutely, we're facing a lot of challenges right now on your side and the things that you're navigating on our side, making sure that we're creating every opportunity to recognize your achievements in light of all the challenges. We'll do that. You need to trust that we'll go through that process. We're going to identify ways to recognize you as we go along. So happy to be here and happy to turn to the questions and back to Allison with it all.
Great, thank you, Nathan. And I just also wanted to add to a little bit about what Hope and Stephanie talked about in kind of shaping your college list. So right now, as you can imagine, college counselors are super busy with seniors trying to get through our November 1st deadlines. But after that, we're, while we may not be sitting down until after December with juniors to kind of create that list, we recognize that now is a great time to start your research. I will be offering some workshops in the College and Career Center on really how to research. I have a lot of books that students can take out. I know there's a lot online as well, but let's just say, I think Hope, you mentioned maybe you're interested in, colleges with merit scholarships. There's lists for that. Maybe you want to be a psychology major. There's lists of great schools that offer psychology as a major. So, we recognize it's hard to start developing your list because, there are thousands of schools out there. So just recognize that, while we're not having those official meetings until a little later in the winter with juniors, that, we're still happy to help you to identify ways to, really start that research. So let's go ahead and get through some questions. Can one of you speak to the early decision and early action process? Kind of what does that mean, and what are some pros and cons? Anybody want to take that?
great way to kick us off. And starting with early action and early decision, they are both processes where you can apply an earlier timeline, as you may guess, to a certain university. So there are a couple different distinctions. First one is early decision is a binding decision. So you have made the decision that if you are admitted, you will attend that university. Early action means that you are taking steps early, but you have not made a decision. You are just prefacing that your application is coming in earlier. It may be reviewed earlier, but you have not made a binding decision yet. So I think that's the key distinction. It's really important to make sure you know whether you're doing early decision or early action. With that in mind, they're a pretty similar process in the review process on our end. Essentially, most early action or early decision, especially if you are, early decision 1, we can get into that too, means that you're going earlier in the process. They're usually going to have November deadlines, and you'll often hear back before the new year. So you might, hear back on an earlier deadline and an earlier process. Some schools now have ED2, WashU was one of them, that align with their regular decision deadlines, but you'll still hear back earlier in the process than perhaps if you had applied regular decision. I would say there are some obvious benefits in the sense that not only do you hear back earlier, but you kind of know where you're going. That can give you a nice, sense of fulfillment if you're heading into, your winter break. There is also at many institutions a advantage in applying early decision or early action. Many universities will have a higher acceptance rate for students applying early, and we'll see really strong pools in their early pools. So that's just something to note, that some different universities handle early decision or early action differently, but for some schools, there is an advantage in applying earlier in the process. So feel free to ask an admissions officer about that. I think one of the cons, especially with early decision, is that you are making a decision. So, you are making that decision. You need to make sure that it's an academic, a social, and a financial fit for your family. And so you don't have time to kind of revise that a little bit later in the process. Obviously, if something happens, please work with your institution. Many are able to, to have those conversations, but it is a little bit more of a decision at the front, and not everyone is going to be ready to make that decision. Early action can depend if it's a restrictive early action. Just note that you can only apply to one school early using restrictive early action. But I think there are fewer cons to the early action process. Most students are able to, if you're able to make the decision early, great. But if you're not, that's okay too.
Unmute myself here. Okay, another question is around declaring a major. So putting a major down in an application, what are some pros and cons of that? And what if a student has no idea what they want to study? Is that, looked upon negatively?
I'm happy to jump in and answer that one. So as with much in higher education and admission, it depends on the school that you're applying to. Some schools admit directly to specific majors, and so they know that they're going to admit this many people to major in business and this many major in engineering, this many XYZ. And once you're admitted to that major, you're admitted to that school at the university, and it can be very difficult to change your major once you're there, right? So if you know what you want to do, it's great. If you're not so certain, it's not always as great because you don't have a lot of flexibility, and there could be different admission rates for different schools, majors within a university. Other universities admit to the university in general, and you declare your major a little bit later. Neither method has a huge, most schools have a general education curriculum, so most students their freshman year take relatively similar classes in that sort of model, and so you've got an opportunity to do a little more exploration. I would say if you know what you want to do, you're probably going to be an engineer or an accountant, but if you know what you want to do, it's totally fine to apply to schools that have direct admissions into the specific majors. But if you want to have a little more flexibility or aren't quite as certain at this time, I would look for schools that give you the opportunity to apply either as undeclared or admit you to the university, and you can switch around once you get there. So that's the big difference. And if you ask schools, they'll tell you if they're doing direct to the major or not. They're not trying to hide that. They do want you to know coming in because they want you to come, enroll, and graduate. They don't want you to come and then be disappointed that you can't major in what you want and leave.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. Let's see, Hope mentioned the Common App versus a few other types of applications. Can you just kind of touch upon, what is the Common Application versus using other applications?
Yeah, so absolutely. The Common Application is probably the most common application platform that you will see out there. It is many schools use the Common Application. So you can fill out one general application, and then there's going to be additional supplements for each school. So one kind of online platform that lets you go to many schools at once. There's also a platform called the Coalition application. They are very similar. They ask for essentially the same exact information, but they have different sets of schools that you can apply to using those. A lot of overlap. Many schools will accept both of these applications, so it's your choice. There are some specific schools that only accept one or the other. So just make sure you do your homework, as Stephanie was mentioning. Doing your homework on this is important to see whether you are picking the right application platform. There's also something called the QuestBridge application, which is specifically serving students who are coming from under-resourced backgrounds. And so if that is your family's identity, please investigate the QuestBridge process. It's a little bit more specific, but it's another alternative where you can provide information and apply through schools through the QuestBridge application process.
And we should probably note, Allison, and hope that for schools that are on the Common App, they've made an agreement that they will not prioritize any application over any other. So it doesn't matter, frankly, if you do the Common App or the Coalition app, or some schools have their own individual app. No one gives you bonus points for doing a different type of application.
Yeah, well stated. Okay, we have a few questions on deferring for a year. So obviously, many students did make the choice to defer admission for this year. But it looks like the questions are centered around, just what are the policies around deferring, and, do you allow deferrals? Maybe some of you could touch upon that.
Happy to jump in first, and perhaps my colleagues have more to say. So we do have a deferral policy now at the University of Connecticut, which is something that we just restarted. Previously, we had one maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and we had decommissioned it for a time. And, obviously coincides with the pandemic to a degree, and everybody was kind of predicting that we would have this really large number of students that would defer this year in light of the pandemic. That didn't actually turn out to happen. We had roughly the same number of deferrals as what we had in years prior to the pandemic, prior 5-6 years ago when we had a deferral policy. And so that has not changed much. But basically what you have to do is, after you receive your offer of admission, you let us know that you're interested in potentially deferring your admission for a semester or up to a full year, letting us know what your plans are. We are going to ask that you pay an enrollment deposit in that instance. And oftentimes merit scholarships are available, as are honors offers at our institution. But that's something you're going to want to check, I think, from one institution to the next. The degree to which you're able to actually utilize a scholarship or honors offer if you're to defer your admission to a future term. Definitely make sure you do that research and ask that question.
Okay, and we had another question about honors programs. Can you talk about the benefits of an honors program, if you have an honors program?
I can jump in again if you want. So we have an honors program. This year we had a class of 3,800 first-year students at the University of Connecticut, and about 550 of them were in our honors program. Mean SAT, that group this year was around a 1430. So very high, obviously, on that front. We're looking for students that are really in honors level courses, advanced level coursework now. That are going to be a good fit for the honors program, and students that are really looking to kind of fast track their entry into undergraduate research or study abroad opportunities or other things. And for the most part, most students are, I think, looking for that type of enrichment opportunity. But these, and they are available to all students at institutions that have honors programs. But these are students that are obviously looking for that more fast track enriched opportunity, much like what they would have at their school now. There is an honors thesis that's required. There are additional requirements and completion of the degree to actually graduate with honors. And the thing that I would say is that great if you're interested in honors. If you want that all the way through your undergraduate degree, we would really encourage you to pursue that. If you're kind of on the fence a little bit, don't feel obligated if you get an offer to an honors program that you have to enter that and go all the way through. We would actually appreciate to hear from students that would say, I'm interested. I'm obviously done a lot of honors already, but I'm not interested in completing all the way through honors. And so sometimes we see that as well for our students that are coming in. One thing to point out is at the University of Connecticut, our merit scholarships and our honors offers are two separate things. So you can actually be offered honors and a merit scholarship separately. And so that's an important thing, again, as you're looking at universities and you get those offers coming to you, that you want to make sure that you understand the differences between what is actually being packaged in terms of your offer of admissions to honors and scholarships.
So the honors programs may be one of the areas where kind of bigger schools and smaller schools diverge. So we have a freshman class of about 815 students at the University of Richmond. So we're pretty small already. We do not have a separate honors program here, although we do have merit scholarships available for our students. We don't have a separate honors selection process or honors program here. So the classes are intrinsically smaller and writing heavy. Writing is not a word, I know. I just made it up. Oh, and a quick shout out to AK, who asked specifically what percentage of our class deferred at University of Richmond. Sorry, I didn't notice that you asked that specifically. We had 22 students defer, and no, that is not going to impact our admissions decisions for next fall. It's not a big enough number that we have to change anything in our admissions process for fall of 21. Sorry, circle back.
And I think maybe if, Hope and Nathan could also kind of comment on that. Obviously, that is like the number one question here is just about deferrals. So obviously current seniors are concerned, but even thinking about juniors, do you see potentially more people deferring, and could that potentially shrink the incoming class for 2022?
I mean, I can only speak on behalf of WashU here, but we also did not see a significant increase in the number of students requesting a gap year. And so we also do not anticipate that it will affect our admissions process for the incoming class or, future classes as well. We've always seen some slight fluctuation in gap years. And, we actually had some students who originally requested a gap year. Their gap year plans got changed or canceled in many cases and actually came back into the class. And so I think it was really dependent on each student specific situation. And we are not anticipating that it will significantly affect our admissions process in the years to come.
Yeah, same here. We had just over 100 deferral requests. Some of those were for the spring semester and some of them were for the fall. And so not even all of those were for the fall semester. And, like Stephanie suggested, that's just not a number that's significant enough for us that it's going to change much in terms of our selection process for the next class, or for that matter, the class after it.
Great, thank you. That's all comforting advice. And I think we're about, our time is about up for this evening. I think we got through most of the questions, but there were a few that were very specific questions. So I would definitely encourage you to feel free to reach out to me directly via email, and I'm happy to answer any questions that we didn't get to tonight. And I just wanted to, again, thank all of you. This was incredibly helpful, and I can only speak for myself, but I'm sure the families here in attendance really just appreciate your really candid feedback and answers to questions. And, thank you for taking time out of your Monday evening to be with us here tonight. And I think we're going to wrap it up.
Happy to do it. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, everyone.
Allison, thanks for coming.
Thanks, guys. Very fun to see y'all.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Good night.